this area. Nigel has been a minister of the Full Gospel Church, and he's also been a pastoral supervisor. So Nigel comes to us with lots of professional experience in counselling in his private practice, as well as facilitating behaviour change programs in family and domestic violence in the New South Wales Corrective Service. He's also active, as a counsellor in the Victim Services of New South Wales. So Nigel has a passion in growing ministries in Australia, and who lives with his wife, who's also a chaplain. So we want to welcome Nigel, and thank you for giving up your time today so that you could help us to grow in our experience and knowledge and insights in how to help people in our neighbourhood facing violence, whether it's emotional, physical, or mental, spiritual. So thank you. We'll hand it over to you, Nigel.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Sharon, for that wonderful welcome. I'll just share my screen and we'll get started. All right. So please, if the screen drops or anything doesn't work properly, please speak up so I know that we're on the same page. So again, thank you for the invitation tonight. I wanted to just confirm that we're working in a sort of healthcare environment as one where it says that we reach more people through healthcare than we do through churches, and therefore we reach people through healthcare with more presence in society. And I wanted to encourage us tonight that we can make a difference. Just a little bit about my passion. My passion is to help ministries, their ministers, families, and teams. And there's a link to the website there. And the way that I do that is a spiritual well-being through pastoral supervision, emotional health through relationships counseling, and life skills learning, where at no cost I can provide access to 140 professional training programs through corporate training materials. I think this is our call, this is our role, this is our faith, that we do no harm and we reduce patient harm, but also it says that we avoid low value care. And I really like that expression from the Royal Australian College of Practitioners. We avoid low value care. And of course, all of us, whether we're in medical or some other practice, we're all called by the scripture and our Lord to love the neighbor as ourselves and to do for them what we would do as we treat others with the same care, kindness, dignity that we afford ourselves. So tonight we're going to take a look at 5 areas: understanding what family violence is, and then the world or the secular's response to that. Then we'll take a look at what's available in terms of safety, support, and even healing for those impacted by family violence. Then I want to finish with a spiritual response to family violence and finish finally with how we can make a difference in this place. The Australian government manages a website, the Institute of Health and Welfare. And I just want to encourage you to bookmark that website. It is full of so much useful information. It provides evidence and information for making better decisions, improving health and welfare for all Australians. And that's a website I want to encourage you to bookmark. Now, if you go through that website, it talks about family violence, and it says that basically that if we look over on the right hand side here, before the age of 15, 13% of adults before their age of 15 were impacted by family violence. After the age of 18, 1 in 4 women experience violence from an intimate partner, 1 in 14 men do. And 90% of the hospitalizations involving assault by a partner relate to hospitalizations to women. Now, if you go through that website and you search for either family violence or family, domestic, and sexual violence, you will end up in exactly the same place here. So when we say family violence, we're actually meaning family, domestic, domestic and sexual violence. They are the same thing. So, as we talk about family violence, I want us to remind ourselves it's family, domestic, and sexual violence. What it represents is really putting those two things together. Family and domestic violence refers to violence related to that occurs within families or intimate relationships. Sexual violence encompasses a range of behaviors perpetrated by anyone, but therefore it does have a context within the family. It therefore links to both domestic violence, so it's a combined family, domestic, and sexual violence. That's what we mean by family violence within families, within intimate relationships. Now, what does that look like? The violence or abuse that occurs within a family or an intimate partner relationship. Take a look at these bullet points here that indicate quite clearly the type of abuse, the type of violence that takes place. Parents and children, siblings, other relevance. Well, by nature, families. I also want to draw your attention to coercive control. I mean, historically, we've seen family and domestic violence as a physical or sexual violence related to a single or one episode, but it's now got a wider range, a wider coverage of behavior and harms, now including emotional abuse, harassment, stalking, controlling behaviors. Now, coercive control is a key area for that. However, within Australia, national reporting on coercive control is currently limited, and this has been highlighted within Australia as quite a critical information gap. Now, what is coercive control? It defines a pattern of controlling behavior to establish, maintain control over another person. Perpetrators, excuse me, use coercive control to deprive another person of their liberty, autonomy, and agency. Physical and or sexual violence do not need to be present for coercive control to occur or for it to have its harmful or traumatic consequences. And I want to just highlight what it says about coercive control. It can also involve or occur alongside other behaviors and harms, commonly referred to as a new term, technology facilitated abuse. Technology facilitated abuse can take the form of stalking, surveillance, tracking, threats, harassment, and the non-consensual sharing of intimate images. Perpetrators may use devices, accounts, software, or other platforms to control, abuse, and track those victim survivors. Well, this is quite a lot to take in tonight. So I want to take a time to just catch our breath and ask ourselves what is the importance of self-care and what does your self-care look like? So for me, you can see that I have a cavoodle and I play the guitar. But I need to let you know that whilst the cavoodle is real and I do play guitar, I do not have rock star clothes or a very expensive guitar, Gibson guitar. I'm more of a Fender guitar person myself. But I wanted to bring this out to show you how important AI can be and how it's changed the way that we see the world. So this new term, technology facilitated abuse, can take the form we've said, stalking, surveillance, tracking, threats, harassment, and the non-consensual sharing of intimate images. Now, on that subject, I just want to say that in New South Wales, it's a crime to create, share, or threaten to share sexually explicit images, videos, or audio of someone without their consent, whether that content has been digitally altered or not, or generated by AI. AI is a place for a person in a sexual situation where they were never involved, but and is promoted on the internet as deep fakes. So it's a crime in New South Wales to create, share images or audio without consent, regardless of how they were made. It's even a crime, it says, to threaten to make such material. Now, this law in New South Wales works alongside existing child abuse material to protect young people. Under criminal law, any material that depicts a person under 18 in a sexually explicit way can be considered child abuse, including AI generated material. Now, that criminal law against the publishing of images and audios without consent works alongside other bodies. And I wanted to highlight the fact there's another organization, the E-Safety Commissioner, who regulates online environment and supports people to have a safer online experience. So, what that basically means is the New South Wales law working alongside this framework supports, a better experience, a safer experience online in terms of cyberbullying. When someone on the internet tries to be mean to a child or young person so as they feel bad or upset, adult cyber abuse, sending photos, sharing posts harmful to physical or mental health of someone, and as we've said, image-based abuse. This is the organization, the E-Safety Commissioner, that looks at online images and online data. And yes, it's illegal and it's restricted online content and shouldn't be put out there at all on the internet. But if it shows or encourages any childhood sexual abuse, terrorism, or other extreme violence, then it's breaking the law. What sort of things are harmful online activities? Are you familiar with some of these? I'm familiar with some, but I'm not familiar with all of them. We've mentioned coercive control. Sexting is sending sexually explicit materials over text. Child grooming, we maybe finish. Catfishing is quite a significant a tool, yes, to catch other people in relationships. And there are other types of harmful online activities that the E-Safety Commissioner is responsible for. Now, I want to mention that the sources and surveys that we're going to look at tonight from police, hospitals, and support services are limited and not complete by nature of the fact that information around domestic and sexual violence is not always reported. It is under-disclosed, and there is inconsistent recordings. Bear that in mind as we look at the statistics. Most victims, especially women, stay in violent relationships, and many experience violence during or after separation. About 30% of women with current partner violence temporarily separate, but often return based on a promise or the change or the promise of love. Over half of the domestic homicide victims are female. Most female victims are killed during separation. Family violence protection orders are widely used by the police. Thousands are issued annually, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. Most defendants in family violence cases are male. And these defendants face court, are often prosecuted, and these offences are not decreasing, they're increasing. So the statistics to us, as I say, that are not complete because they're under-disclosed, and a lot of people don't want to disclose some of the family, domestic, and sexual violence. But the statistics known are one woman was killed every 8 days and one man every 41 days by an intimate partner. Males are around 3 times more likely to die by suicide than females. And the suicidal risk factors for men of all ages are problems related in spousal relationships. So by that I mean a breakdown of relationship, court-ordered access to the children or restricted access to the children have a huge impact upon men and their suicide. So what that means is 650 plus suicides annually from problems in spousal relationships. That is 14 men suicide every 8 days. I've got more to say about that in a moment. Now, what is the response then? The secular response to family violence? Well, it says the most common intervention for perpetrators is something called men's behavioral change programs. And some of you may know of them. Some of you may be familiar with them or even run them as part of NGOs. The other response is that police services intervene directly with perpetrators. They include protection orders. They include arrests, criminal charges, and even prosecution and sentencing through criminal courts. But I want to highlight that 29 reviews that assess the effectiveness of behavioral change intervention programs for a reduction in family domestic violence or intimate partner violence, only one of those 29 reviews concluded that they work. 24 reviews reported on the impact of behavioral change programs with mixed findings and concluded there is currently insufficient evidence. And whilst women and children are the focus for safety, is a core priority of all perpetrator interventions, we're saying it's just not working. I just want to mention here that some years ago, I was offered a place from New South Wales on a postgraduate diploma in men's behavioural change. And during the second intensive, organised by New South Wales, I actually walked off of the training. I was very disappointed by the facilitation and the approach. I felt the training offered to NGOs was poor and unhelpful for changing men's behaviour. And I did that in comparison to the work that I was privileged to be part of with Corrective Services or DCJ, working with offenders in the community and behavioural change programs there. We've got a long way to go with men's behavioral change programs, but at the moment, it's the most common intervention in use. All right, another response is mandatory reporting. Now, you may, by nature of your role or responsibility, have a mandate to do that. But I'd like to call out the Northern Territory because in the Northern Territory, you must report domestic, family, and sexual violence. It's the law. If you're over 18 in the Northern Territory, you must report this to the police. It's the only state in Australia to have mandatory reporting for all adults in relation to domestic and family and sexual violence. Now, that's whether you're in an organization where you have best practices or you have requirements. Everybody in the Northern Territory, every adult that's aware must report it. Another response to family violence is clearly the police services are available through 000 and apprehension violence orders that are supposed to restrict the connection between those that are perpetrators and those that are trying to survive. Now, even though AVOs have certain conditions and they vary, and even though they're enforceable by law, it doesn't stop violence happening. The other response to violence is something called DVLOs. They're the domestic and family violence liaison officers that work as a specialist police role in police stations. And what they do is they help anybody that's involved in domestic, family, or sexual violence to be aware of the child protection procedures, the victim support, and the court AVO processes that are required for victims of family violence. So be aware that there are services within the local community, within the local police station. I want to now take a look at other responses in terms of community services and online services. Well, when it comes to community services, I'd like to draw our attention back to this website, the Australian Institute for Health and Welfare, because if you drill your way through those links that I showed you earlier, that they call family violence, then you'll find that there's a lot of valuable information showing you the organizations, contact details, and the descriptions of resources that are available through community services around Australia. From that same website, here are some more resources and services that are available. You may be familiar with some of these. And here are some more services available from that website. So I guess I'm trying to say that website is a really good place to go to find out what services in the community are available for different aspects of family, domestic and sexual violence. And again, more services. What I also wanted to do is I'd highlight those as being community services, but clearly they do relate to safety, support, and healing. But I wanted to shift the conversation now to what else is specifically useful for safety, support, and healing for those impacted by family, domestic, and sexual violence. So, yes, we've got all of those services that are available through that website, but also today, because we're very much a device orientated society, there are a number of applications that are available to us. Emergency Plus is actually the recommended mobile app to call police for police assistance in Australia. It uses built-in GPS functionality from the smartphone to help a 000 caller provide critical location details when mobilizing emergency services. The Empower You application um, is used to obtain contact details of support services, to send messages with your location to trusted friends, or gather information about your experiences so you can send onwards to a friend for safekeeping. I'm a safe application is an application for women to alert their trusted contacts using SOS sirens, record incidents of abusive behavior, and provide contact information for local support services, and also to reach out for help instantly with alerts and live location sharing. It's also got a fake call feature to help women leave uncomfortable situations. Daisy is an application that connects people experience violence or abuse to local services across Australia. Are useful for people that are surviving violence, or family members and friends can use that as well. Now, I also wanted to just mention an application that um, my clients reference from time to time. That is Our Family Wizard. Now, this is a fee for service application, but this is an application used by co-parenting, where two parents have shared access to the children. They're trying to negotiate drop off, pick up, and all sorts of dialogue and communication, which, as you can imagine, can be very conflictual. This application is known for being heavily used and accepted by the courts. It features a shared calendar, secure messaging between the two parties, and even logs for tracking costs between shared parents. So rather than use WhatsApp or texting, this is an application that records information between two parents and can be used in the courts. Now, there are other support, safety, and healing helplines and support lines. And I just draw your attention to just a few of those that are available. The one thing I do want to highlight is Domestic Violence New South Wales. Here, this is the peak body for specialised support with domestic and family violence services in New South Wales. So if you go to this website, it will represent approximately 200 member services across the state. Elder abuse helpline, because domestic and sexual violence doesn't just occur with adults or young children. There's a kids helpline. Beyond Blue is quite a popular service that's available. There's a men's referral service. We're familiar with Lifeline. And I've also got a couple of men's support services here as well. And I've been privileged to find out about those working with offenders in the community. These are men's organizations for help and support and for healing when they're perhaps ordered by courts, they can't have access to the children. They're trying to work through the story of getting access to their families. And don't forget, most of the perpetrators are men, so there's certainly a sense of judgment by society, but these groups can assist with that. Blue Knot is a known organization. They also offer, by way of support, safety and healing, some workshops for both survivors and for the families, friends, and partners of loved ones. And these workshops are focused on dealing with strategies for healing and recovery. They're free of charge. There are workshops for survivors For example, 1 hour interactive sessions and 2 hours, and also in-person full-day workshops for survivors. But there's also workshops, excuse me, for supporters, full-day workshops for the friends of those who have experienced any form of childhood trauma and or abuse. So what we come to now is the question over, well, we've got a definition of family, domestic, and sexual violence. We've got an idea of what that looks like. We've got an idea of how that can happen across the internet. And we've got an idea of some of the organizations that are available to support um, safety, support, and healing. But what I wanted to do is take a look at the spiritual response. How do we, as Christians, where we're called to treat everyone equally in terms of providing equal dignity, equal respect and love, regardless of their status or their belief? And also from Proverbs 31, it says, speak up for those who cannot speak up for themselves and need somebody to advocate and defend for them. So let's take a look at what that means. Question for you. Do you think that favoritism is a good thing? Do you think that there is a place where giving others a bit of a helping hand in domestic family sexual violence can be a positive thing? Or do you believe that we should show equality when it comes to all situations, especially men and women? So I wanted to talk about those two terms, equality and equity. Now, equality means each individual or group of people is given the same resources or the same opportunities. Whereas equity recognizes that each person has different circumstances and allocates the exact resources and the exact opportunities needed to reach an equal outcome. So I wanted to provide an example of what equity versus equality looks like. Yes? Now, as you look at this PowerPoint slide, what do you see? Do you see equity or do you see equality? Have you ever had an experience like this? Do you see favoritism? Firstly, equity recognizes that each person has different circumstances and allocates the particular resources needed to reach an equal outcome. So as we look at this slide, can we say that equity is fair? Does equity favor certain people based upon their circumstances, despite wanting to achieve an equal outcome? And as I was putting this slide together, I was reminded many years ago, I was queued up outside of a men's toilet. The disabled toilet wasn't used, and I'm the sort of person, my wife will tell you, where I sort of cross lines from time to time. I thought, I'm not waiting in line, so I went and used the disabled toilet that was vacant at the time. Well, I used the toilet and I was quite relieved. But when I came out of the toilet, I found that there was a disabled person in a wheelchair waiting to go in. Um, and I felt a little bit guilty, I have to say. What about equality? Take a look at this. This is more equality, isn't it? It's saying that each individual or group of people is given the same resources and the same opportunities. So these women could use any of these toilets here if they wanted to. Now, I was going to ask, you don't need to answer, but I was going to ask, how would the women feel about using toilets that men have been in beforehand? Well, maybe we might alleviate that by saying, please be courteous to women when you leave the toilet. But my question still holds. Is equality fair? Is equality practical, giving the same resources across a range of people and groups? So here's an example to show you what I really mean. On the left, we have an example of equality. Each of these three Three people, despite their different circumstances, are given exactly the same resources. But as you can see, it doesn't achieve the desired outcome. That is equality. This, on the other hand, is equity, where equity allocates sufficient resources to individuals based upon their needs to achieve the same outcome. And so we can see the tall person doesn't require a box, the middle person requires one box, and the shorter person requires two boxes. The same outcome is achieved, but the resources allocated to them individually is different. Giving women the same resources may not achieve the same outcomes for all women. Giving men the same resources may not achieve the same outcomes for all men. Giving men the same resources may not achieve the same outcomes for all women. So I wanted to come back to those statistics that I mentioned earlier. One woman was killed every 8 days, and one man killed every 41 days by an intimate partner. Almost 2 men suicide every day from problems in spousal relationship circumstances. The breakdown of the relationship, the loss of access to the children, the isolation from the family systems they're used to. But I do want to emphasize tonight that homicide and suicide should not be treated equally. Women and children and their safety is the core principle of all perpetrator interventions. But I think what I'm trying to communicate is that equity and equality should inform our decisions, and equally, equity and equality should influence or bias our priorities. That's not always the case when we look at the community services that are provided to the community in the area of domestic, family, and sexual violence. So as we think about our spiritual response, we need to remind ourselves what the word says about these harmful situations. We don't war against flesh and blood, against the rulers and authorities, against the powers of this darkness. We don't war against flesh and blood, but we do war against rulers, authorities, powers of this dark world, and spiritual forces of evil. We know that the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy, but Christ came that we might have life to the full. And there's also a scripture I wanted to put here in terms of trying to negotiate and navigate issues of equality and equity in these complex situations, that we can trust in the Lord with all our heart, lean not on our own understanding, but acknowledge him, submit to him, and he will make our straight paths. Now, I wanted to emphasize, as Christians, I believe we function in this space in two areas. We either function as saints to a hurting world, or we function as warriors against those forces that are trying to hurt. So as we think about that, I wanted to quickly cover something that I introduced during my previous presentation, but it's about being emotionally overwhelmed and how empathy can help to support people that are emotionally overwhelmed. Women, men, and children become emotionally overwhelmed by many domestic, family, and sexual violence issues in many ways. And being overwhelmed impacts their abilities to function effectively. What we can do as a spiritual response is to provide empathy, and it helps us to connect with those who are overwhelmed in their struggle and their pain. So very briefly, the amygdala is basically the center processing part of our brain for emotions. It can cause or contribute to disruptive feelings and symptoms, and it's a response to stress. It disables parts of our brain, activating fight-flight response. It disables rational, reasoned responses. Our emotional brain, when we become overwhelmed, gets hijacked. And here's a video to emphasize that. Some of you may have seen this before.
We know you're really busy, so we're keeping it quick. It's the manager minute or two. Yeah.
We've all had conversations where we've left feeling like they just missed the mark. Why does this happen? Well, part of the reason has to do with our brain, specifically the amygdala. What's the amygdala, you ask? It's only Sarah's favorite part of the brain. The amygdala is the part of the brain that is constantly scanning your environment for threats so that it can move you into action so it can protect you. Those threats might be physical, mental, emotional, or even to our ego. One of the ways I like to think about the amygdala is to imagine it's this shaky little neurotic chihuahua. It's shaking and it's nervous and it's ready to bark at anything that it perceives as a threat. Some of us have more neurotic chihuahuas than others. So what does any of this have to do with conversations? When our amygdala is triggered, it hijacks our brain. It pumps our body and our brain full of these chemicals and hormones that shut down parts of our brain. So we lose access to things like logic and reasoning, problem solving, listening, and empathy. All things pretty important to building trust. So when my amygdala is triggered or when your amygdala is triggered, there's no way we can connect and build trust in the same way as when we're calm. So what do you do if you notice the amygdala has been hijacked and you or the other person? That is a really good time to step away, take a breath, and regroup when both parties have had a chance to breathe. Here's your challenge. I want you to do an amygdala audit. Think about a time when you had a stress response and think about what did it feel like when you were going through that. Because the more aware you are about your response, the more likely you can catch it when it's happening in the moment. Or you're more likely to notice it in someone else. And remember, play fully brave. Did you find this helpful?
So what I wanted to say...
We know you're really busy, so we're keeping...
So what I wanted to say was people that are involved with family, domestic, and sexual violence are intensely overwhelmed. We can't imagine what they're going through. We can't appreciate the stresses and pressures they face. But the purpose of that video was to highlight that when that happens, they will not be able to function rationally, logically, solve problems, even listen to us, and certainly not empathize with the situation. So I think our spiritual response is to understand, well, how can we connect to these people that start to maybe come to us? How can we respond to them in a way that's going to support their safety, to support their well-being? Well, one thing that we can do is empathy. And I know that some of you already know this is my approach to it. There are 5 steps. Empathy are steps to connect and care for a person. Take your shoes off, put your feet in their shoes. Hold judgments of what's right, wrong, good, bad, true or false. Try to think what they might be feeling. And then you have to be brave enough to say what you think they might be feeling. And then after that, it's a big full stop. Say no more, be quiet, shut up. Because empathy is a statement of what you think they might be feeling. And that's enough. Empathy is not a tool for communication. It is not a tool for resolving conflict. It's a tool to simply connect to that person. And you might be the only person, if you're brave enough to say what you think they might be feeling, and you don't know what they're feeling, but if you think they're feeling something and you're brave enough to say it, you might be the only person that they feel understands what's happening for them. And you may not know the full story, but what it does in those moments of being totally and absolutely intensely overwhelmed by family, domestic, and sexual violence, you might be the first person that connects to them and the first person that they feel that, well, somebody else understands what I'm going through. There is a therapeutic model available. It's called the conversational model. It was developed in the 60s, and it's not intended to replace other counseling therapeutic models like CBT, EFT, DBT, I say XYZ or ABC approaches. But it's a model based upon conversation. And it integrates with any of those other models that you know of. And it's about developing a conversation with the person. And it's based upon a collaborative emotional dialogue. It's focused on the quality of interaction rather than a process of trying to interpret, gather insight, or behavior modifications. It's not intended to direct conversation towards predetermined insights. It's careful to pay attention to the timing, tone of the conversation and listen to not only what is said, but how it's said, how conversations unfold emotionally, listening to pauses, hesitations, shifts in tone, and also looking for the non-verbals, those bodily responses, and moments of emotional connection, contact, or emotional withdrawal. We're using a model of conversation to help us develop this connection with those undergoing intense experiences and emotions. What might that look like then? What sort of things? Well, I'm going to encourage you to go away and do your own research. But for me, as you try to think about a conversational model, it's not trying to find and fix. You're trying to just have a conversation with that person. And it's about it's being generally interested and generally recognizing a responding to their situation. So here's a couple of thoughts that I put together. You could ask them, how are you doing? But I would ask you to say this, how are you doing really? I've tried that recently, and it's such a different response. How are you doing is a sort of dismissing how you're going today. But when you say, how are you doing really, it's surprising the different response you get from people. You might say something like, I can't imagine what you're going through. You might ask, who is the person that you most trust to support you while? And I know this sounds weird, but if you did know, then what would your answer be? What I mean by that is, I've had occasions where clients have said to me, well, I just don't know, Nigel. I've asked them a question, well, what might happen? What might you do? What are your thoughts? And they've said, I just don't know. And I know it sounds weird, but if you ask them, I know you don't know, but if you did know, what do you think your answer would be? And you might be surprised to hear their responses to that weird question. And even a simple response to that conversation where you could say something like, I noticed you, or I noticed that you're attuned to something and you just reflected that to them. So just a couple of brief ideas on how you might develop your own vocabulary, your own narrative towards conversational model. It is itself a whole therapeutic approach that I'll leave with you. Now, the reasons why we struggle and the reasons why we become so totally emotionally overwhelmed, and especially during family, domestic and sexual violence, is that we have predisposing factors. These are underlying vulnerabilities that make a person susceptible to a situation. Maybe it's a disorder, genetics, life's personality traits or lifetime experiences. As you're having conversation with somebody, you're trying to listen to, why me? Why is it happening to them? And get a sense of what might be impacting them as a predisposing factor. Why now is the sort of things that you're listening to during conversation. You might hear triggers or stressors that initiated a current episode or a symptom. Why does it continue? Why am I continually experiencing violence or abuse in this relationship? These are perpetuating factors that maintain the problem and prevent recovery, maybe through poor coping mechanisms, lack of support. But we can also start listening to what helps. You might discover in that conversation with them that they start to say, but my friend Bob or my Sally or this group that I attend, I get some relief or some support. So you're also listening to protective factors, strengths and resources that support them to cope and reduce the impact of the violence and abuse. So as we finish, I wanted to just come to a couple of final slides to say that you can make a difference. Despite a society in which we live that is still struggling to work out how to effectively implement and impact positively the safety of men, women, and children, I spoke about men's behavioral change programs and the reviews and the research around that and how they are very lacking. But despite that, we can still have an impact in a struggling world. We can have an impact where there are favored or certain approaches that are failing men, women, and children. You might hear that they've been attending certain programs, or they've been part of certain groups. And even though those approaches may be favored by some organizations, even favored by society, then we can have an impact and we can make a difference by bringing a spiritual component to that. And also, where we have society that has favored equality and ignored equity in a context where every family and every situation is unique. We saw that slide earlier where three people of different physical heights needed equity. One needed no stool to achieve the outcome. One needed, no box. One needed one box to achieve the outcome. One person needed two boxes. So I think as we approach these situations, that they're also very unique based upon the individuality of the people that we come across. And I think if we can put our mindset into this, is not about providing equality for people, it's listening to what the need exists for them and how we can provide an equitable solution. How can we make a difference? We've got access to the website that I referred to earlier. That is a great source of information and organizations that can support the safety, well-being, and healing of people. We can have equality in respect and dignity, but we can also have equity in our response and support. Conversational approach is an integrated approach to the roles or responsibility that we have. And though we might think that that sort of approach is very straightforward and common sense, it takes practice to have a good conversational approach to people when they're in tense, emotional, overwhelmed conditions. I also wanted to say that the Holy Spirit will lead and guide you if you ask him. He will do that before, during, and after any interactions with the people that you meet. I want to remind us of the promise and the power that exists in prayer. And we may not know always what we have to pray, but we can pray for people even though they may not know we're praying. And we know that the promise and power of prayer will persist. I think we can move our thinking away from from protection and intervention, even though they're very important. But if we can bring our thinking to preemptive support, reducing the need for protection and intervention. One of my passions is to get to the young men earlier, before they get to jail, before they get convicted of crimes, to preempt that and provide support for them earlier rather than later. I want to encourage us that, yes, we have a responsibility to those around us, but we're not responsible for them, and not to carry the burden of compassion with us. The compassion is a beautiful thing, but it can be a burden. We're responsible to them, but not for them. And I believe that a godly presence, just by our presence in a situation or a conversation with people, we can bring a godly presence into an imperfect and an unjust world that exists with imperfect systems. We can be relationally focused rather than simply referring somebody, oh, well, you need to see a counselor, or you need a support group. Let's develop relationship and then do a measured referral when we can. Let's develop connection before correction. And the last thing I wanted to say is I believe we're called to be saints and warriors as we support those in need and as we fight against the principalities that want to hurt and harm those around us. Thank you very much.